We're now going to go over the anatomy of long bones, and as we go through that, you will be learning about different aspects and characteristics of bone as a tissue and of bones in general. So this is going to be the femur, and you can tell that because the head is marked, because if you take a look at the upper left part of this diagram, it says spongy bone. All bones are going to have a layer of what is known as compact bone on the most superficial surface. Deep to that will be what's known as cancellous or spongy bone. And it's called spongy bone because, what a surprise, it looks like a dried out old sponge. You can see the compact bone that's labeled there on the left. And again, the spongy bone will be deep to that compact bone. When you're looking at a long bone, you will see that there will be two ends which are known as epiphyses. Epiphysis is singular. Diaphysis is the fancy word for shaft. In the diaphysis, you will have a medullary cavity, which is basically a cavity that's going to be dug out by certain types of bone cells. And the red marrow in children and the yellow marrow in adults will be housed in that. Just another picture of the same thing with some more details. So we've already talked about the terms on the right-hand side, which are the epiphyses. One will be closer to the trunk, and therefore it will be called the proximal epiphysis. The one that's furthest from the trunk will be known as the distal epiphysis. So long bones will have two epiphyses, one proximal, one distal. The diaphysis, again, is the shaft. Let's take a look at the terminology that is on the left-hand part of this diagram. We've already talked about a couple of these, which include spongy bone, which will be found deep to the compact bone. We've also already talked about the medullary cavity, which is going to contain yellow marrow in adults and red marrow in children. So why would that be? Why would you have red bone marrow in the medullary cavity in kids, but not in adults? Why would that be? Because kids are growing and they have a much greater need to produce and process blood cells than old farts like me. There are a couple of other elements that you need to know about. And let's start with the term that is the top term in the list on the left, articular cartilage. When you talk about bones, the ends will all have articular cartilage on them, and that is going to be specifically hyaline cartilage. You will remember from our histology part that the section that we talked about, histology, cartilage, and specifically hyaline cartilage, is very smooth and reduces friction, and it's going to be extremely important that the bones have that articular cartilage in order to reduce wear and tear on the joint as it moves, particularly what are known as synovial or freely movable diarthrotic joints. You'll also see what's known as the epiphyseal discs, or they can also be called epiphyseal plates. And that will depend on how old the person is. If you see the term epiphyseal disc or line, you have a skeletally mature adult. If you see the term epiphyseal plate, think growth plate. And you are talking about a person who is skeletally immature and therefore the bones are still growing. In addition, you'll see two terms, endosteum, which is sort of in the middle of the left-hand list, and the periosteum, which is at the bottom of that list on the left. End means within, and the endosteum is a very thin connective tissue membrane that is going to sort of line the medullary cavity and help keep the marrow within the medullary cavity. There are certain type of cells that are going to be associated with the endosteum, and they are known as osteoclasts. More on those later. The periosteum is a double-layered membrane. Let me repeat that. The periosteum is a double-layered membrane. Peri means around, so sure enough, this membrane is going to surround the bone. It is what's known as the osteogenic layer because cells that are associated with bone growth are going to be associated with that inner layer of that double-layered membrane. So the periosteum is a double-layered membrane that is considered osteogenic. Stay tuned for all sorts of fun facts on this. The metaphysis is going to be the area between the diaphysis and the epiphyses. It is where the epiphyseal plate or line, depending on whether or not you are an adult or a child, is situated. In this case, it says area of growth plate, and as soon as you hear growth plate or epiphyseal plate, you are talking about a skeletally immature adult. You're talking about someone who is still growing. And there we have it, the epiphyseal plate. So the epiphyseal plate is actually composed of hyaline cartilage that is reproducing, then maturing, then calcifying, and then getting replaced by bone. There will be two epiphyseal plates. There will be one distal and there will be one proximal because bone needs to grow in both directions. Long bone will grow in both directions. We talked about the periosteum, and there you have it, double-layered membrane that is going to attach to bone. It provides protection, it provides support, and it is also going to be what the tendons of skeletal muscle attach to. Tendons do not attach directly to bone tissue. They attach to the periosteum, which is that double-layered membrane that surrounds the bone. We do need to have what's known as a nutrient foramen, and that is the term for the single major canal. Foramen means hole in a bone. So that is a single canal through which the major blood vessel, I should say vessels, that bring blood in and take blood out, enter and exit the bone. We do need to talk about Sharpie's fibers, which are going to be the fibers that basically invaginate into the bone tissue and attach the periosteum to the bone. So if we go back up to this guy, you see where the periosteum is reflected back on the, or in the diagram on the right? You can see those fibers there. Those are Sharpie's fibers. They do have clinical significance because of this. If you have had shin splints, you know that they are excruciating. They can be unbelievably painful. It can hurt to walk. It certainly hurts to run. They're not commonly found, but they're most commonly found in runners or long distance walkers or speed walkers. The reason that they hurt so much is because of this. The muscles are putting such strain on the periosteum that they are actually ripping the periosteum off the bone, and those Sharpie's fibers are being ripped out of the bone. Bone is highly innervated and it is highly vascular because there is such a great nerve supply. It is painful to have shin splints and have these Sharpie's fibers ripped out of the bone as the periosteum is lifted off by those muscles. Not a fun thing to have. Yes, I've had them. This just shows you the periosteum relative to the bone on micrograph. So that was pretty interesting. And this shows you an up close and personal of articular cartilage. Again, we need that articular cartilage, which is specifically hyaline cartilage, because it reduces friction and it is also going to prevent wear and tear on the bone. You rarely, if ever, have bone-on-bone contact. You do if you have some sort of degenerative disease and the articular cartilage has been damaged. to a point where it is gone. Instead, when you have joints articulating on each other, they are actually articulating against other articular cartilage. A couple of videos there to show you what happens at the epiphyseal plate. We're going to be talking about bone growth again. We also need to talk about appositional growth, which we'll do in the future. Appositional growth is growth in diameter of the bone. Bones have to grow not only in height and in length, they have to grow in width too. Otherwise, we'd have these long, spindly bones that would break pretty easily. So as bones are growing in length, they are also growing in diameter. And the fancy term for that is appositional growth. I stuck this in here because you need to know a little bit about the composition of flat bones before we get into ossification and osteogenesis. If you take a look at a flat bone, as I said before, they are not flat. They are sort of rounded or curved. However, if you take a look at them, you will see that there is compact bone on the two surfaces that are sort of exposed, and in between the compact bone will be a layer of spongy bone, which allows these guys to be quite thin.